Raila Amolo Odinga, the ODM party leader, has not declared whether he's going to run for the presidency in 2022 or not. But from all indications, the name Raila Amolo Odinga is likely to be on the ballot in 2022. And last week, while in Mombasa, Raila Amolo Odinga indicated that if they win the presidency, then they'll jail the corrupt. That statement alone confirms that Raila Amolo Odinga is likely to be on the ballot in 2022. And in reaction, William Samoei Ruto convened an urgent meeting of his advisors, and I did a video on this. And during that meeting, there was the presence of one man, Davis Chirchir. Davis Chirchir is a former commissioner of Iebc. In the last election, he was the chief agent of Jubilee Party. Most Kenya believes that the rigging in this country in 2013 and 2017 were actually aided by Davis Chirchir. And that's how majority of Kenyans who saw the photo of Davis Chirchir interpreted his presence in that meeting. And I remember when Eliud Owalo shared those photos on his wall, someone pointed to him out that he had actually deliberately left out the photo of Davis Chirchir. In fact, in most of those people who attended that meeting, the photo of Davis Chirchir were left out, and it was deliberate because initially they started sharing it out, but later on they were advised to remove it. So Raila Odinga has contested for the presidency severally. He first contested in 1997. He was just introducing himself to politics. In 2002, he supported Makwiny and they won against Kanu. Then come 2007, Raila Odinga contested and he won that election. 2013, 2017, there are disputes. There are people who believe that Raila Odinga was rigged out smartly. Raila Odinga himself believes he was rigged out smartly. And in 2017, of course, he went to Supreme Court and the elections were actually nullified. So Raila Odinga must always be keen of two things. The first thing he must always be keen on is that there are people in this country who are determined to block him from succeeding any sitting president in the Republic of Kenya. There are people who are determined that Raila Odinga cannot be the president of the Republic of Kenya. These are the people who locked him out in 2007, because in 2007, Raila Odinga clearly won that election. But at some point, they just decided that he can't be declared the president. So Makwiny was actually sworn in at night. So he must be very keen on those people who are determined to block him. Raila Odinga must also be keen on rigging schemes in this country. As long as there are people who don't want him to become the president, he must be wary of their schemes. And these schemes would even mean these guys aiding someone else. I know Raila Odinga entered into the handshake for one main thing. He wanted the support of the system. He wanted to appeal to the core people. He has never had their support. And President Uhuru Kenyatta is likely to support him. But there's even a challenge in President Uhuru Kenyatta supporting him. There are people who are more powerful than the president in this country. If they are determined to block you, they can rig you out. So Raila Amolo Odinga must be very keen on rigging schemes in this country moving forward. So if I were to advise Raila Amolo Odinga, as at now, he should be concentrating on two things only. The first thing he should be monitoring keenly is the rigging schemes. And number two is the operations at the Iebc. So in this video today, I want us to look at 4 ways rigging always takes place in this country and what Raila Odinga can actually do to prevent any rigging schemes ahead of 2022 general election. But before we do that, if you're watching this channel for the first time, I want you to take a second or two and click the subscribe button so that next time you produce a video like this, YouTube will automatically notify you. And to the subscribers, I want to continue thanking you guys, but I want to appeal to you guys to give this particular video thumbs up. The content of this video can be used by any other presidential candidates. The rigging schemes are the same. How to stop them are also the same. But I'm focusing on Raila Amolo Odinga because it's only Raila Odinga whose victory has always been stolen in this country. Now, let's begin with the rigging schemes. How do they normally rig the elections? 4 ways. Number one is the inflation of figures. In the last election, Raila Odinga's figures in Jubilee strongholds were deflated, while President Uhuru Kenyatta's figures in Jubilee strongholds were inflated. It's normally very simple. Uhuru gets 300 votes, Raila Odinga gets 12. Uhuru Kenyatta's figures, instead of 300, they say it's 350. Raila Amolo Odinga's figures, instead of 12, they're reduced to 5. So he's losing, this guy is gaining. And in 2013 and 7, the inflations were actually targeted at areas which were marginalized. So places like Northeastern province, figures were actually inflated because of the turnout. In Northeastern, the turnout in 2013 was almost 86%. And those who follow the voting patterns in that area argued that time that because of the weather during that time, these guys were looking for water. Because they are nomads, they had actually moved to new areas, which means most of them were not going to be able to vote. So inflation of votes is something Raila Odinga must be very keen on. In fact, one of the reasons why it was agreed that the figures were to be announced at the polling stations was to avoid this inflation. In the last election, Jubilee government insisted that nobody was going to be at the polling station, and the results were not going to be relayed from the polling stations because they were still trying to inflate. Number two is ballot stuffing. This strategy is old method, where in areas where the other party is not really dominant, ballot papers pre-marked are brought, and then after the voting, they're just stuffed in. So Raila Odinga must be very keen on that. And the third strategy is always fake polling stations and fake polling streams. In this country, I think we have streams, polling stations, and each polling stations have streams. I think it's not more than 600, then you go to stream. If not more than 600, streams. So there are certain polling stations which has several streams. So if a polling station is supposed to have 4 streams, then they add a 4th one. I mean, if a polling station has to have, if a polling station has, say, 5 streams, then they add a 6th one. If it's supposed to have 10, then they add maybe 12. And those 12 ones will actually be counted. So Raila Odinga will be given 5, Uhuru Kenyatta 200 in those. In fact, in 2013, it was one of the main issues. CORD at that time identified some of the fake polling stations which were never there, were never gazetted, and fake streams, and the results were actually used. And lastly, Raila Odinga must also be very keen on changing the figures. Now, this is a case where Raila Odinga gets 400 votes, Uhuru Kenyatta, let's say 20. Then the results are sent, but someone just add 1 before 2, so it becomes 120. So at the end of the day, he has received 120. And you see, most of these rigging are normally undertaken by well-educated, well-learned, in most cases by the intelligence system. So Raila Odinga must be very keen on any voting scheme. So Raila Odinga must be very keen on any rigging schemes in this country. But how can he stop rigging schemes? I know one of the reasons he entered into the handshake was to prevent his rigging through being friendly to the system so that he can understand how certain things are done. But again, as I said, there are certain elements who are always keen on blocking him. So the first thing he must do is that Raila Odinga must invest heavily in agents. polling agents. And not just polling agents, they must be trained properly on how to handle polls on the poll day. In 2013, when Eliud Owalo was the Raila Odinga's chief campaigner, there were complaints that Raila Odinga agents were bought. And that's actually the beef between Raila Odinga, Eliud Owalo, and Karoli Omondi. It is alleged that after Raila Odinga had invested in agents, they had prepared the agents, then they were deployed. Most of these people turned out to be state agents. Most of them were actually bought. So there were areas where agents were, ODM agents were, but they turned out to be Jubilee or TNA or URP agents. So Raila Odinga must this time around invest heavily in agents. Even in the last election. And the last election, I told them, in the last election, instead of deploying non-ODM supporters, people who cannot be bought, they ended up bringing some people, unknown to people who are unknown to ODM supporters. So most of these people ended up turning out to be fake. Number two, Raila Odinga must invest heavily in parallel tallying centers. The truth of the matter is that in the last election, rigging happened through technology. And that's one of the rigging schemes, and I was forgetting, use of technology. We have people in this country who are serving either as governors, who are serving as members of parliament, or as senators through computers. They never won. So an algorithm was created which ensured that these people ended up winning. In fact, if you followed the pattern of electronic results in the last election, there was a pattern. There was no way Raila Odinga was overtaking President Uhuru Kenyatta. They maintained a certain percentage. So Raila Odinga must be ready to invest heavily in parallel tallying centers, so that as much as those guys will be giving their own results, he will have his results. In fact, what helped Raila Odinga in the Supreme Court was that he was able to prove that some of the results which were announced were actually not the true results. So they must invest in that. Number three, Raila Odinga and his team must invest in ICT and people who understand statistics, the real experts, so that they can always monitor during the tallying whatever is happening. So his ICT team will be able to identify whether someone is actually trying to tamper with the electronic voting system. And this team of statisticians should also be able to study closely any variation in the patterns of the voting. And lastly, he must have vigilant voters. People who, after voting, will be waiting for the results. There was a by-election in Kajiado Central. I was there. On that particular day, the only reason why Jubilee did not win that seat was because the Maasais were vigilant. Otherwise, that elections they had stolen. Nkaiserry wanted to do everything possible because he had been appointed as a cabinet minister. He wanted anything possible to prove a point that is the best, that he could deliver. ODM had a different idea and a different strategy. But the people who saved the day on that day for ODM were actually the voters. They became wild. And they threatened that if the true results were not going to be announced, nothing was going to happen. So Raila Odinga must have vigilant voters. After voting, people will be ready to ensure that whatever was announced there. In fact, one of the things he must do is that IEBC needs to be reformed so that the results will be announced at the polling stations. And the same results which are announced at the polling stations are the ones which are relayed. There is no point of announcing results here at the polling station, then you have to carry it to Nairobi. For what? Thank you guys, and may you have a good day.